The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunsay. Part 16. Chapter 32. Lirazel yearns for earth. In the hall that was built of moonlight, dreams, music, and mirage, Lirazel knelt on the sparkling floor before her father's throne, and the light of the magical throne shone blue in her eyes, and her eyes flashed back a light that deepened its magic. And, kneeling there, she besought a rune of her father. Old days would not let her be. Sweet memories thronged about her. The lawns of Elfland had her love, lawns upon which she had played by the old miraculous flowers before any histories were written here. She loved the sweet soft creatures of myth that moved like magical shadows out of the guardian wood and over enchanted grasses. She loved every fable and song and spell that had made her elfin home, and yet the bells of earth that could not pass the frontier of silence and twilight beat note by note in her brain, and her heart felt the growth of the little earthly flowers as they bloomed or faded, or slept in seasons that came not to Elfland. And in those seasons wasting away as everyone went by, she knew that Elfric wandered, knew that Orion lived and grew and changed, and that both, if Earth's legends were true, would soon be lost to her for ever and ever, when the gates of heaven would shut on both with a golden thud. For between Elfland and heaven is no path, no flight, no way, and neither sends ambassador to the other. She yearned to the bells of earth and the English cowslips, but would not forsake again her mighty father, nor the world that his mind had made. And Elfric came not, nor her boy Orion. Only the sound of Elfric's horn came once, and often strange longings seemed to float in air, beating vainly back and forth between Orion and her. And the gleaming pillars that held the dome of the roof, or above which it floated, quivered a little with her grief, and shadows of her sorrow flickered and faded in the crystal deep of the walls, for a moment dimming many a colour that is unknown in our fields, but making them no less lovely. What could she do who would not cast away magic and leave the home that an angelus day had endeared to her while centuries were withering like leaves upon earthly shores, whose heart was yet held by those little tendrils of earth which are strong enough? Strong enough? And some, translating her bitter need into pitiless earthly words, may say that she wished to be in two places at once. And that was true, and the impossible wish lies on the verge of laughter, and for her was only and wholly a matter for tears. Impossible. Was it impossible? We have to do with magic. She besought a rune of her father, kneeling upon the magic floor in the midmost centre of Elfland, and around her rose the pillars of which only song may say, whose misty bulk was disturbed and troubled by Lirazel's sorrow. She besought a rune that, wherever they roamed through whatever fields of earth, should restore to her Elfric and Orion, bringing them over the border and into the elfin lands to live in that timeless age that is one long day in Elfland. And with them she prayed might come, for the mighty runes of her father had such power even as this, some garden of earth, or bank where violets lay, or hollow where cowslips waved, to shine in Elfland forever. Like no music heard in any cities of men or dreamed upon earthly hills, with his elfin voice her father answered her, and the ringing words were such as had power to change the shape of hills of dreams, or to enchant new flowers to blow in fields of fairy. "I have no rune," he said, "that has power to pass the frontier, or to lure anything from the mundane fields, be it violets, cowslips, or men, to come through our bulwark of twilight that I have set to guard us against material things. No rune but one, and that the last of the potencies of our realm. And kneeling yet upon the glittering floor of those who profound translucence song alone shall speak, she prayed him for that one rune, last potency though it be of the awful wonders of Elfland. And he would not squander that rune that lay locked in his treasury, most magical of his powers, and last of the three, but held it against the peril of a distant and unknown day, whose light shone just beyond a curve of the ages, too far for the eerie vision even of his foreknowledge. She knew that he had moved Elfland far afield and swung it back as tides are swung by the moon, till it lapped at the very edge of the fields of men once more, with its glimmering border touching the tips of the earthly hedges. And she knew that no more than the moon he had used a rare wonder, merely wafting his regions away by a magical gesture. Might he not, she thought, bring Elfland and earth yet nearer, using no rarer magic than it is used by the moon at the neap? And so she supplicated him once again, recalling wonders to him that he had wrought, and yet used no rarer spell than a certain wave of his arm. She spoke of the magical orchids that came down once over cliffs like sudden roseate foam breaking over the elfin mountains. She spoke of the downy clusters of queer mauve flowers which bloomed in the grass of the dells, and of the glory of blossom that forever guarded the lawns. For all these wonders were his, bird song and blooming of flower alike were his inspirations. If such wonders as song and bloom were wrought by a wave of his hand, surely he might by beckoning bring but a short way from earth some few fields that lay so near to the earthly border. Or surely he might move Elfland a little earthward again, who had lately moved it as far as the turn in the path of the comet, and had brought it again to the edge of the fields of men. Never, he said, can any rune but one, or spell, or wonder, or any magical thing move our realm one wing's width over the earthly border, or bring anything thence here. And little they know in those fields that even one rune can do it. And still she would scarce believe that those accustomed powers of her wizard sire could not easily bring the things of earth and the wonders of Elfland together. From those fields, he said, my spells are all beaten back, my incantations are mute, and my right arm powerless. And when he spoke thus to her of that dread right arm, at last perforce she believed him. And she prayed him again for the ultimate rune, that long-hoarded treasure of Elfland, that potency that had strength to work against the harsh weight of earth. And his thoughts went into the future all alone, peering far down the years. More gladly had a traveller at night in lonely ways given up his lantern than had this elvish king now used his last great spell, and so cast it away, and gone without it into those dubious years, whose dim forms he saw in many of their events, but not to the end. Easily had she asked for that dread spell, which should appease the only need she had, easily might have granted it were he but human, but his vast wisdom saw so much of the years to be that he feared to face them without his last great potency. Beyond our border, he said, material things stand fierce and strong and many, and have the power to darken and to increase, for they have wonders too. And when this last potency be used and gone, there remains in all our realm no rune that they dread, and material things will multiply and put the powers in bondage, and we, without any rune of which they go in awe, shall become no more than a fable. We must yet store this rune. Thus he reasoned with her rather than commanded, though he was the founder and the king of all those lands and all that wandered in them, and of the light in which they shone. and reason in Elfland was no daily thing but an exotic wonder. With this he sought to soothe her earthward fancies. And Lirazel made no answer but only wept, weeping tears of enchanted dew, and all the line of the elfin mountains quivered as wandering winds will tremble to notes of a violin that have strayed beyond hearing, down the ways of air, and all the creatures of fable that dwelt in the realm of Elfland felt something strange in their hearts, like the dying away of a song. "Is it not best for Elfland that I do this?" said the king, and still she only wept. And then he sighed and considered the welfare of Elfland again, for Elfland drew its happiness from the calm of that palace, which was its centre, and of which only song may tell, and now its spires were troubled and the lights of its wall were dim, and a sorrow was floating from its vaulted doorway all over the fields of faery and over the dells of dream. If she were happy, Elfland might bask again in that untroubled light and eternal calm whose radiance blesses all but material things. And though his treasury were open and empty, yet what more were needed then? So he commanded, and a coffer was brought before him by elfin things, and the knight of his guard, who had watched over it forever, came marching behind them. He opened the coffer with a spell, for it opened with no key, and taking from it an ancient parchment scroll, he rose and read from it while his daughter wept. And the words of the rune as he read were like notes of a band of violins, all played by masters chosen from many ages, hidden on midsummer's midnight in a wood, with a strange moon shining, the air all full of madness and mystery, and lurking, close but invisible, things beyond the wisdom of man. Thus he read that rune, and powers heard and obeyed it, not alone in Elfland, but over the borders of earth. Chapter 33. The Shining Line. Elfric wandered on, alone of that small company of three, without a hope to guide him, for Niv and Zend, who were lately led by the hope of their fantastic quest, no longer yearned for Elfland, but were guided now by their plan to hold Elfric back from it. They vacillated more slowly than sane folk, but clung with far more than sane fervour to each vacillation. And Zend, that had wandered through so many years with the hope of Elfland before him, looked on it now that he had seen its frontier as one of the rivals of the moon. Niv, who had endured as much for Elfric's quest, saw in the magical land something more fabulous than was in all his dreams. And now, when Elfric attempted lame cajoleries with those swift and ferocious minds, he received no more answers from Zen than the curt statement, "It is not the will of the moon," while Niv would only reiterate, "Have I not dreams enough?" They were wandering back again past farms that had known them years before. With their old grey tent, more tattered, they appeared in the twilight, adding a shade to the evening, in fields wherein they and their tent had become a legend. And never was Elfric unwatched by some mad eye, lest he should slip from the camp and come to Elfland, and be where dreams were stranger than Niv's, and under a power more magical than the moon. Often he tried, creeping silently from his place in the dead of night. One moonlight night he tried first, waiting awake until the world seemed sleeping. He knew the frontier was not far away as he crept from the tent into the brightness and black shadows and past Niv sleeping heavily. A little way he went, and there was Zend sitting still on a rock, gazing into the face of the moon. Round came Zend's face, and newly inspired by the moon, he shouted and leapt at Elfric. They had taken away his sword, and Niv woke and came towards them with immense fury, united to Zend by one jealousy, for each of them knew well that the wonders of Elfland were greater than any fancy that their minds would ever know. And again he tried, on a night when no moon shone. But on that night Niv was sitting outside the camp, relishing in a strange and joyless way a certain comradeship that there was between his ravings and the interstellar darkness. And there in the night he saw Elfric slipping away towards the land whose wonders far transcended all Niv's poor dreams, and all the fury the lesser can feel for the greater awoke at once in his mind, and creeping up behind them, without any help from Zend, he smote Elfric insensible to the ground. And never did Elfric plan any escape after that, but that the busy thoughts of madness anticipated it. And so they came, watchers and watched, over the fields of men, and Elfric sought help of the folk of the farms, but the cunning of Niv knew too well the tricks of sanity, so that when the folk came running over their queer fields to the queer grey tent from which they heard Elfric's cries, they found Niv and Zen posed in a calm that they had much practised, while Elfric told of his thwarted quest of Elfland. Now by many men all quests were considered mad, as the cunning of Niv knew. Elfric found no help here. As they went back by the way which they had marched for years, Niv led that band of 3, stepping ahead of Elfric and Zen with his lean face held high, made all the leaner by the long thin points to which he had trained his beard and his moustaches, and wearing Elfric's sword that stuck out long behind him, and its hilt high in front. And he stepped and perked his head with a certain air that revealed to the rare travellers who saw him that his sparse and ragged figure esteemed itself the leader of a greater band than were visible. Indeed, if one had just seen him at the end of the evening, with the dusk and the mist of the fenlands close behind him, he might have believed that in the dusk and the mist was an army that followed this gay, worn, confident man. Had the army been there, Niv was sane. Had the world accepted that an army was there, even though only Elfric and Zend followed his curious steps, still he was sane. But the lonely fancy that had not fact to feed on, nor the fancy of any other for fellowship, for it was its loneliness mad. Zend watched Elfric all the time as they marched behind Niv, for their mutual jealousy of the wonders of Elfland bound Niv and Zend together to work as with one wild whim. And now one morning, Niv stretched himself up to the fullest possible height of his lean inches and extended his right arm high and addressed his army. "We are come near again to Earl," he said, "and we shall bring new fancies in place of outworn things, and things that are stale, and its custom shall be henceforth the way of the moon." Now Niv cared nothing for the moon, but he had great cunning, and he knew that Zend would aid his new plan against Earl, if only for the sake of the moon. And Zen cheered till the echoes came back from a lonely hill, and Niv smiled to them like a leader confident of his hosts. And Elfric rose against them then, and struggled with Niv and Zen for the last time, and learned that age or wandering or loss of hope had left him unable to strive against the maniacal strength of these two. And after that he went with them more meekly, with resignation, caring no longer what befell him, living only in memory and only for days that he had been, and in November evenings in his dim camp, in the chill he saw, looking only backwards through the years. Spring mornings shine against on the towers of Earl. In the light of these mornings he saw Orion again, playing again with his old toys that the witch had made with a spell. He saw Lirazel move once more through the gracious gardens, yet no light that memory was able to kindle was strong enough to illuminate much that camp in those sombre evenings, when the damp rose up from the ground and the chill swooped out of the air, and Niv and Zend, as darkness came stealing nearer, began to chatter in low eager voices, schemes inspired by such whims as throve at dusk in the waste. Only when the sad day drifted wholly thence, and Elfric slept by flapping tatters that streamed from the tent in the night, then only was memory, unhindered by the busy changes of day, able to bring back Earl to him, bright, happy and vernal, so that while his body lay still in far fields, in the dark and the winter, all that was most active and live in him was back over the wolds in Earl, back over the years in spring with Lirazel and Orion. How far he was bodily in sheer miles from his home, for which his happy thoughts each night forsook his weary frame, Elfric knew not. It was many years since their tent had stood one evening a grey shape in that landscape, in which now it waved its tatters. But Niv knew that of late they had come nearer to Earl, for his dreams of it came to him now soon after he fell asleep, and they used to come to him further on in the night, on the other side of midnight, and even towards morning, and from this he argued that they used to have further to come and were now but a little way off. When he told this secretly one evening to Zen, Zen listened gravely but gave no opinion, merely saying, "The moon knows." Nevertheless, he followed Niv, who led this curious caravan away in that direction from which his dreams of the Valley of Earl came soonest. And this queer leadership brought them nearer to Earl, as often happens when men follow leaders that are crazy or blind or deceived. They reach some port or another, though they stray down the years with little foresight enough. Were it otherwise, what would become of us? And one day, the upper part of the towers of Earl looked at them out of blue distance, shining in early sunlight above a curve of the downs. And towards them Niv turned at once and led directly, for the line of their wanderings' march had not pointed straight to Earl, and marched on as a conqueror that sees some new city's gates. What his plans were, Elfric did not know, but kept to his apathy, and Zen did not know, for Niv had merely said that his plans must be secret, nor did Niv know, for his fancies poured through his brain and rushed away. What fancies made what plans in a mood that was yesterday's? How could he tell today? Then, as they went, they soon came to a shepherd standing among his grazing sheep and leaning on his crook, who watched and seemed to have no other care but to only watch all things going by, or, when nothing passed, to gaze and gaze at the downs until all his memories were fashioned out of their huge grass curves. He stood, a bearded man, and watched them with as never a word as they passed, and one of Niv's mad memories suddenly knew him, and Niv hailed him by his name, and the shepherd answered, and who should he be but Vand? Then they fell talking, and Niv spoke suavely, as he always did with sane folk, aping with clever mimicry the ways and the tricks of sanity, lest Elfric should ask for help against him. But Elfric sought no help. Silent he stood and heard the others talking, but his thoughts were far in the past, and their voices were only sounds to him. And Vand inquired of them if they had found Elfland, but he spoke as if one asked children how their toy boats had been to the Happy Isles. He had for many years to do with sheep, and had come to know their needs and their price, and the need men have of them, and these things had risen imperceptibly up all around his imagination, and were at last a wall over which he saw no further. When he was young, yes, once he had sought for Elfland, but now, why now he was older, such things were for the young. "But we saw its border," said Zen, "the border of twilight." "A mist," said Van, "of the evening." "I have stood," said Zen, "upon the edge of Elfland." But Van smiled and shook his bearded head as he leaned on his long crook, and every wave of his beard as it shook slowly denied Zen's tales of that border, and his lips smiled it away, and his tolerant eyes were grave with the lore of the fields we know. "No, not Elfland," he said, and Niv agreed with Van, for he watched his mood, studying the ways of sanity, and they spoke of Elfland lightly as one tells of some dream that came at dawn and went away before waking. And Elfric heard with despair, for Lirazel dwelt not only over the border, but even as he saw now beyond human belief, so that all at once she seemed remoter than ever, and he still lonelier. "I sought for it once," said Van, "but no, there's no Elfland." "No," said Niv, and only Zen wondered. "No," replied Van, and shook his head and lifted his eyes to his sheep. and just beyond his sheep and coming towards them, he saw a shining line. So long his eyes stayed fixed on that shining line coming over the downs from the eastward that the others turned and looked. They saw it too, a shimmering line of silver or a little blue like steel, flickering and changing with a reflection of strange passing colours, and before it, very faint, like threatening breezes breathing before a storm, came the soft sound of very old songs. It caught, as they all stood gazing, one of Van's furthest sheep, and instantly its fleece was the pure gold that is told of in old romance, and the shining line came on, and the sheep disappeared altogether. They saw now that it was about the height of the mist from a small stream, and still Van stood gazing at it, neither moving nor thinking. But Niv turned very soon and beckoned curtly to Zend and seized Alveric by the arm and hastened away towards Earl. The gleaming line that seemed to bump and stumble over every unevenness of the rough fields came not so fast as they hastened, yet it never stopped when they rested, never wearied when they were tired, but came on over all the hills and hedges of earth. Nor did sunset change its appearance or check its pace. End of part 16. If you have been enjoying this audiobook, please take the time to subscribe. It would really help the station. If you could also like or leave a comment or share this station with other friends, that would be great. Thank you.